Greetings! Welcome to Terra Prime Live. Darth Anonymous, more not joining me.
Good evening.
And we have our friend from Syracuse, Ben Judkins, scholar and apprentice. How's it going?
Excellent. Nice warm weather today. Nice for a change.
Yes.
You're very fortunate. We've got cold again here.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah. You're getting what you're getting tomorrow. We've got it.
That's about it. Yeah.
So.
But good evening, Ben, and thanks very much for being able to join us tonight. This can be a good conversation, I think.
Yes, absolutely. Hopefully we will have our friend from across the pond, Darth Serval, joining us here at some point. He's having some technical difficulties, but will join us when he can. So anyway, yes, we are talking about rule sets right now. Now, when we showed up back in 2012, there was really nothing. So we were kind of like starting from scratch. We didn't have anything to compare against. There weren't any of the leagues or the things that are happening now, kind of out there. Most of it was choreography. So now, flash forward to nowadays, it seems to be that the combat is now the dominant form of lightsaber.
Everybody has tournament rules, bouting rules, scoring rules.
Yes. We've got multiple groups out there, some big, some small, and really, if I'm absolutely certain of this, although I don't have any evidence of it, is that almost certainly there are little groups that are using their own rule sets that we have no access to. So we're going to we'll start off very general here, kind of talking about what we look for in a rule set, or because we use many different types of rule sets, and the different purposes a rule set can have. And then we'll kind of finish up with looking at some of the more accessible, larger rule sets that are available out there for people to try out. Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So we can begin at that point.
Well, what's the purpose of having a scoring system for lightsaber combat?
Yes. Well, and that's the thing. I mean, why have a scoring system at all? In martial arts, the competition aspect comes into it almost always. In every martial art, there's a tournament, own rules, and all this other stuff. And it comes, from the fact that, two people fighting is a very primal type of thing. Wrestling matches go back as far as written history.
Yeah.
Public for entertainment wrestling matches. Not war, just thugs. But nowadays we can, there's a lot of different ways that we can use those for that. I think probably primarily, and where we come from as traditional martial artists, is we're looking for a rule set, ultimately, or a bunch of rule sets that can sort of give an analog to real combat, a way that we can, and a place that we can use, test, and kind of verify our skills and our ideas that we have about combat, using these weapons and all that kind of thing.
What gives us a reasonable simulacrum of the results of actual fighting, actual contact, without having to worry about missing limbs and bloody stumps in the leg.
And that's the elephant in the room. What's the purpose of a rule set? The rule set is so that you can fight without actually hurting the other guy, right? Now, in real combat, like in a real duel with real weapons and everything like that, you don't need a whole lot of rule sets. It's the person who can walk away from the thing. That's the person who wins, right?
Makes it hard on your partners when you're practicing.
Right, exactly. And it makes making mistakes almost impossible, or learning from the mistakes. Making the mistakes is easy, right? But then you don't get to come back and do it again.
A little more costly way of learning from your errors.
Yes, exactly. So that's really what we're getting here. So hello,
Hello from France. Sorry for the delay.
Oh, yes,
Some
thank you.
mistaken update with Firefox.
No, okay. All right, we're just kind of going in through a little introduction here. So when we are looking at rule sets, when we started looking at rule sets, and what a lot of schools will look at rule sets, is looking for a way that we can kind of simulate or figure out a way to help us figure out, are our skills working? Is this is what we're doing kind of on the right track? Do we understand, the things that we're doing and that we're practicing? From that point on, you can then move into a competition setting where you're looking to put your skills against other people and see where you rank within them. And then when you get into the competition, you can then branch off into entertainment. Competitions have, when they get popular enough, have a kind of responsibility to the audience to give them a good show as well as a good fight. You can see that in MMA. The first UFC tournaments, if you remember watching them, were boring because it was just some jiu-jitsu guy grabbing a boxing guy and choking him out for however long they let those things go.
Yeah.
And then they instituted the 30-second rule, where you had to do something within 30 seconds, or you separated, because well, people pay a lot of money to go sit there and watch two people beat up on each other, and that's what they want to see.
So we wind up with settings where sometimes the rule system is designed to provide some artificial scenarios for the sake of the people who are viewing, as opposed to the people who are participating.
Yeah, exactly. So MMA, the extreme example is like WWF and WWE and all that kind of thing, where it's not real, it's not exactly choreographed, but it's.
If you keep moving in that direction, you probably wind up with choreographed fighting.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, you get something, whatever like that. So that's kind of where we start with that. Ben, do you have anything to add to that? And then we'll kind of move over to.
Yeah, I mean, when I'm thinking of rule sets, one of the things that immediately strikes me is their pedagogical value. So, I'm a college professor. I spend a lot of time giving exams and grading exams and all that, boring stuff. And you could think of an exam as our tournament. And there are two different philosophies in the educational world. One is that exam is, purely an empirical exercise for me to see how much you learned, and that's it. And, I think that's a waste. I want my students to continue learning through the testing process. So the testing process itself is one of the things that teaches you and moves you forward, right? And I think a lot of professors, if you're in a discipline with essays and a lot of that kind of writing, tend to think in that way. Same thing with tournaments, right? If you have a rule set, people are going to practice to the rule set, which means they're going to learn things, and it's going to affect their behavior. And so you want to make sure that you think about going in, what are the lessons people are going to learn, from this? What are the behaviors I want to encourage? Because there are lots of ways to fight with a sword, or lots of ways to fight with a stick. And you probably actually have some goals going into this. So, how do I use my rule set to inculcate, proper martial behavior?
Right.
Yeah.
Yep. And then you have to, you want to define what exactly that is, what type of behavior you're trying to impart. And a lot of times that you'll get into differences of philosophy in some senses between rule sets and all of that kind of thing. Rule sets being used to dictate behavior is another kind of way to do that, and we'll talk about that especially because one thing that we're going to use to judge on this is specific types of behavior, specifically defensive behavior. What do rule sets encourage defensive behavior, or do they encourage offensive behavior? And that's one of those judges or criteria that you can judge on. Cedric, how about you? Do you have anything to add to that as we go on? Because you've been very active in creating rule sets recently.
Yes. I think I agree with Ben. As we can see in France, there is a lot of rule set on academy, and it's difficult to make one tournament with different rule set because practitioners have to work on this rule set to be efficiency and good with the fight. So when we create the Academy of Sabre Laser, we try to get some rule set who will be not as efficiency martial arts because it's too quick, it's too short for the movement, and we wanted to make real Star Wars fight. So we try to make lightsaber we like a convention weapon. So with our rule set, we make some rules that you get the priority with a special strike. So that's the way we wanted to create a fight with not choreography, but it's as near as possible a real fight. So it's very difficult to create this rule set.
Yes, and that's one thing that when we start looking at the rule sets out there, that like the attitude towards this, especially with this. Now, this is something that probably comes up more with lightsaber than any other traditional martial art. Possibly Chinese martial arts get into this a little bit, but is the specifically making it look like the movies and not like a real fight.
Yeah.
That is a departure, right? That we see a lot in these rule sets. There's a few rule sets out there that are aspiring to that, to give you a choreographed look without it being choreographed.
In comparison to the ones that are focusing on what's the most efficient way to get from point A to a point.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So those are two different kind of like approaches that are major approaches that we're seeing amongst the groups out there. And so that's something to kind of keep in mind. Yeah, I mean, I suppose we can. I don't know do we have any other general comments before we move on? Start looking at some specific sets.
Yeah, I guess you could say there are people who are pursuing each of either of those, or what's the goal that they're trying to achieve.
Right.
Exactly. Your rule set will reflect your values, right? So what are your values up front?
Right. Exactly.
A lot of let's take modern sport fencing, foil épée saber. For someone who is not into the sport, watching a bout is confusing, maybe a little bit nonsensical. It's two people who come together very quickly, and then somewhere in there something happened, and someone now has a point. Mm-hmm. For people who are into it, for people who are participating, that's awesome.
Right.
Some of these rule sets where there is an attempt to bring not an element of choreography, but an element of what Star Wars lightsaber combat is like, or whatever it is that you're trying to represent.
Right.
Now you're creating something that's a little more attainable for a viewing audience who is not steeped in whatever the mythos background rule set is. Also, for people who are participating, it's an opportunity to explore a little bit more of the action that you're drawing from, whatever your background is.
Yeah, and we can kind of see that as like what's the flow of information? Is the flow of information? Are you communicating with the audience in this with this rule set, or are you communicating with the practitioner, right?
Yes.
The rule sets that I use, and I don't usually call them rule sets. I call them games. You know, like the hand hunt, the head hunt, all of the marks of contact. These are all specifically rule sets that kind of fall into different categories and have different things. I use all of them because I'm trying to teach people things, and each of these rule sets teaches something different. Example: hand hunt, timed rounds, one target, the hand, right? So that's the only target you have to worry about or whatever. That's obviously going to be good for movement, for accuracy, for timing, for for all of that kind of thing. Now, that's not always going to be the way you're going to want to fight. You shouldn't think that that's what combat is like. That's a combat game which builds up a particular skill which you can then bring into a real combat. And that's the thing too. None of this, we know, none of these rule sets, we know this isn't real. That's why we have the rule set, because we don't know if our arm is on the ground, right? So we trust the rule set to tell us when we've lost a limb or when we've died, because we don't want to really do that.
It's counterproductive to learning.
Yes, exactly, exactly. So yeah. So that's the thing. Are you communicating out to the audience, or are you communicating into yourself? And that's one thing you really want to have a good handle on when you're talking about a rule set. It's because that's going to affect how successful you can judge your set. You know, is it accomplishing the goals? If you're doing a set that's really good for the practitioner, which is an inward type of thing, and you're trying to get spectators to get into it, you're going to have the same problem that fencing does, which is there's a barrier between the people who don't know exactly what's going on. You know,
so I mean the basics of most of these combat systems are one person is attempting to land one or more hits on another person, and that can go by literally in the blink of an eye. And if someone doesn't understand what the intricacies are behind that, what the steps are, or what the importance of how people and weapons are moving, or how impact is happening, they're going to lose most of the point of it. And it will again be that flurry of things happening, and then they've stopped and somebody's won, and who knows why.
Right. Yep. Yeah. Anything else you guys want to add before we?
No, I totally agree. But, I'm wondering if before we jump in, we should talk about, what a couple of the standard games or rule sets that we use in TPLA are, both, for our internal training and maybe when we come together, or, for competition.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what I think you probably do. So like I said, I use a few different rule sets. I use the hand hunt, which is a very simple game. The head hunt is also a very simple game. Both of these are easily judged, and so they're timed. So you have a timed round, which people can either gain as many points as they can, right? With the head hunt, you can actually turn that into a point-by-point type of game where you stop the action between hits. So it's a little bit more flexible in that way.
Yeah.
Then we do basically we call it marks of contact, where we've taken the marks of contact and given them point values, right? And so your strike has to go to this particular region or whatever. If you do a sai through a particular target, it costs that much. Do a cho, costs that much there. Now, that's good for points and learning and everything like that. It's difficult to officiate yourself. It's not something that you kind of have to have somebody outside doing it. Hand hunt is really easy to just have two people and you just keep score yourself, right? How many times the guy hit on the hand, and that's it, right? And then at the end, you compare your numbers.
The simpler the scoring mechanism, the easier it is to keep it a self-judge activity,
right?
Which is friendly for training. If you're going to have a more elaborate game, a more elaborate system where you're going to start involving judges, that's something that we start to think about more frequently as possibly for public presentation, tournament settings, displays, convention settings.
Yeah. Now, when we spar, like when we're just sparring with each other, we generally don't use an explicit rule set. It's kind of honor system, and we judge each other. We basically judge the hits, but we're judging the hits on ourselves when we're sparring. We're not trying to see, oh, how many hits did I get on him, right? You know, I'm judging, okay, I got here. How was that a good hit? Would it have done something to me? Is it something that's like, meh? You know, and I can judge my performance based on that. So those are usually very loose, and obviously friendly, and no score is capped and stuff like that. Sometimes you keep the score just so you have something to race against, you know, and then you don't end up exhausting yourself.
Yeah. Do you use timed rounds?
For hand hunt, yeah.
For hand hunt.
Yeah, and for head hunt. But you can do both for head hunt. So,
okay.
Yeah. Now, the other one thing we were trying to do with the marks of contact was, could you set it up so that you could just have timed, judged rounds, similar to what you see in other combat sports like kendo and fencing and boxing and all that kind of thing, where you have some judges and they're judging each round, and then at the end of the match you announce a winner, stuff like that. We experimented with that kind of stuff. It ended up being that it's very difficult to judge these things, and that you get wildly incongruent opinions, you know, with people.
You get a little tunnel vision when you're right there in the middle of it yourself.
Yeah, and so like having somebody on the outside and everything like that, it was, you know, worked, but it was probably a little too complicated for that that kind of thing. So those are the things that we've used over here. We'll start with you, Ben. What do you guys use in Syracuse and Ithaca?
So we're kind of firm believers that, you know, you don't want to have a single rule set, because, you know, we want to train complete martial artists. We don't want people to be wed to a particular rule set. So, you know, as I think about the last couple of, you know, bigger tournaments that we have run, you know, as opposed to, you know, just kind of training games, one was kind of more of a continuous scoring sort of a situation. But, you know, yeah, I mean, you know, you had two line judges that, you know, were necessary to make that work, right? You know, it becomes a much bigger operation at that point. You actually have to have, you know, a ref and line judges and kind of infrastructure. But I do like that kind of continuous scoring like you would have in boxing, in that, you know, it adds a different physical element to the game. You know, suddenly endurance becomes, you know, and that type of fitness becomes a huge determinant, even bigger than it normally is anyway, you know, an outcome. You know, and you know, like I exactly like you, in kind of less formal sparring, you know, after class within the schools, it is that same kind of honor system game. We always go to timed rounds. Again, you know, we generally use 3-minute rounds and try to keep the intensity up, again, for the physical training aspect of it, you know, the endurance training. One of the things I really liked, though, was a different structure we experimented with a couple years ago, where we did a tournament that was based on cumulative points, right? So you just added, you didn't really declare winners or losers at the ends of matches. You know, everybody fought everybody, and you added up every point that everybody got at the end of the tournament, right? Towards the end of the tournament to determine who your winner had been. So it was a total point sort of a spread that you were looking at. And, you know, that was really interesting because suddenly, even if it looked like you were losing, you had an incentive to not give up any points, right? You know, you would think that it would make people, you know, very greedy, but it also, you know, had this other effect that people, in some senses, became more defensive, and that you didn't want to give up points to the people that you were competing against, even if you thought they might beat you in this match. You know, if you could deprive them of a couple points going forward, it was a good thing. So, you know, we play under a variety of rule sets. I like the continuous sparring that we have experimented with, you know, myself. But as you stated, it's difficult. You know, you need a bunch of line judges to make that work, and they need to have good eyes.
And I think the problem with continuous fighting is that the fighter doesn't know what are the score at the moment. That's I think for us and for the fighter, it's difficult to know where I am, how many points I've got. So that's why we stop the fight at some mark of contact to score it. So at any time, each fighter knows what point he gets from the fight. And that's very important because there are different rule sets about effectively fighting in 3 minutes without a stop. But I think it's very hard for the judgment of the fight and for the fighters too, because as I said, they doesn't know where they are about the score.
Yeah, I would say that the timed round, the appeal of a timed round, at least for me, is that very thing. The fact that you don't know how many points you are. Are you ahead? Are you behind? Right? And the reason is because that simulates a duel, right? Where you may be getting wounds and you may be dying, but have no idea. Right, like you may be bleeding out and you're going to be dead in 3 minutes, and that other guy's going to walk away and you will have no idea, right? Because you think you're beating them because they notice that you're bleeding out of your femoral artery, and now they're just parrying and they're just staying away from you and hoping you pass out before you get a good shot on them, right? That's down and dirty, right? So that's another type of context that we're trying to kind of simulate. We don't really want to do that. But, you know, yeah. So again, when you're like, if you're doing a competition, you know, you are, well, I guess it goes back to what we're saying. Is it for the fighters? Yes, that's probably not going to be the greatest like learning, because you can't reminisce on like, what did I do wrong in that particular exchange? Right, you kind of have to look at things more general. What did I do in that whole big fight?
You learn a different set of lessons.
Yes, yeah, you learn a different set of lessons, absolutely. But yeah, so that's I would like that would be for me the appeal of the thing. And you're right, it is difficult with weapons. It's difficult to do the timed rounds, just because weapons, all of that kind of stuff. It's much harder to see, right? You can get the tip of those weapons moving at such a clip. It's easier to see with the lightsaber, but sometimes you hear a pop and you don't know which person it came from.
Yeah.
Right? Like one person didn't even touch the other guy, but the pop came out just as it went behind his mask from your view. Totally looks like a double. I don't know, whatever. So it gets challenging. Definitely.
Until we get some kind of automated scoring system like modern sport fencing has.
Right.
some of the games are going to be not necessarily as accurate as we would like them to be.
Yes, yeah, exactly. All right. So now so we kind of went into what you guys are doing in France, and it's kind of a system of what we call right of way over here, or you call priority, where you start you basically start a movement, and the other person is committed to defending against that.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
And now it's not always the rule set for right of way. A lot of times is maligned because it is kind of a difficult. You need other people watching to kind of really. You can't really self administer it very well because you need somebody kind of like being able to judge both parties. Did this person react or whatever? So that's one limitation to it. But the purpose of right-of-way rules is to do something that we'll mention here, and we're going to bring in through all of this stuff, which is trying to encourage people to defend, to react. Because we're not actually getting hurt, because we're not losing actual limbs or anything like that, we're just getting points. It's easy to game a system to where it's just, let's get the point and not worry about what's happening here. If I can get the point first, that's good for me. And so what happens is you get exchanges where you don't have a whole lot of defense. You don't have back and forth. You don't have exchanges. You have two people kind of circling each other, and then you got it.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
So probably one of those common points of discussion within the community is about how people are managing simultaneous hits or after blows. That is a strike that lands just after you have been struck within a very short span of time. These are things that are representing someone who is fighting without protecting themselves when they are striking. But you also have to consider that maybe it's just that you are protecting yourself and the other person just got ahead of you, which is the point.
Right, exactly. So systems of that, of right of way and of priority, are set up to help facilitate that. And again, as you were mentioning, your system then is sort of, we've now kind of turned the flow of information going out to the audience. We want the audience to understand what's going on a lot more, to create a more dynamic and exciting match, spectacle.
There's an element of style or performance has been added into the mix.
Yeah, and that's absolutely valid. And like I said, I think it's something that's very unique to lightsaber, because you don't see that attitude really taken up in any other martial art, unless it's specifically about performance, and then you start getting into, is it choreography, is it real fighting, and those types of things. Let me see if we can get, oh dang, hold on. We're going to try to get somebody else in here, but I got to get a link going. One moment. We'll talk amongst yourselves.
And we have failed at our attempt to banter here.
Yes. So yes, no vamping tonight, evidently. Okay, we're back. And so anyway, without further ado, that's a very good thing. If anybody is interested, and I know Cedric, you have this stuff on. It's on your YouTube channel, correct? Where you have some of the examples of the strikes and stuff like that you use, correct?
Yes. We call it. En fait, there are two strikes to begin, as we name it in France. It's phrase d'arme. It's a sentence weapon. So you have to begin the sentence weapon with what's the name I call it? Armed with commitment. So the totality of the weapon, the blade and the handle, and the who wear it must exceed the vertical axis of the fighter. It's a movement where the blade of the weapon makes a forward movement from the target before returning to it. This attack must be done in 2 5-step maximum. This armed with commitment start the weapon sensors and give the priority to the fighter. That's the first movement.
Yeah. So that system is there, and if you go to that, and I am woefully unprepared for today. I wish I had examples that I could throw right up onto the screen here. But if you look at some of their videos, and you can see how the matches go. There's a lot more kind of dynamic, as I say, rock star stuff.
If there's anything that really stands out to your mind, you might want to throw a link into the comment thread when we're done tonight.
Yeah, exactly. Now, so now looking out the Saberverse, as it were, we've got a lot of kind of groups, leagues, kind of getting together and doing a lot of combat. I think probably the first one we should mention is the oldest one. They've been on the show here a couple of times, Ludo Sport. Ludo Sport is a rule set which is of the type of wanting to communicate with the audience. They're very much into the
element of style.
Yes,
is a significant part of their rule system.
Yes,
and I hopefully Ben can.
Yes, I think Ben, you have a little bit of experience with this.
I do. I have some friends who are in Ludo Sport, and I was fortunate enough to attend their national tournament this last year because it happens practically in my backyard in Elmira, and so it's an interesting. I think it's a very interesting parsimonious rule set that they work under, because one of the things that it does is it accomplishes a lot of goals with a couple of different mechanisms, right? Their E and O scoring system, where they have 2 different types of touches that you can get, kind of a non-fatal hit to the limbs, or kind of a fatal hit to the chest that would actually score a point, kind of like the core of the body. It kind of deals with right of way and eliminating doubles. At the same time, it kind of gives you a hit point thing. So yeah, I mean, it's a very detailed, complex, almost elegant rule set. And when you look through it and you watch their matches, the thing that you can tell about Ludo Sport is they thought a lot up front about exactly what their values were and how those are going to be reflected in what they do. And what the war points are going to do and what their style points are going to do. And yeah, it's and at the same time, boy, does it make for an interesting, flamboyant, acrobatic, style of lightsaber combat.
It's true. Now, the thing about that, and how did it play out at the tournament? Because if you have that kind of jumping around, as in the lightsaber we say a Taru type of style or whatever, in a one-on-one match as martial arts, this is not something that we are wont to do very often. So if somebody were to enter one of those matches and not do that, is that something that can be exploited?
There are different styles, of combat, and some are more, athletic, than others. Our Taru is obviously a lot of jumping around. Their Sicho, isn't. And, you can go in and you can fight with any style that you have trained up to, right? But I will tell, very often, we look at Ludosport, or people look at Ludosport, and our initial, objection is, oh my God, you can get a point by hitting someone in the face, and they don't have fencing masks on, right? They say you're not supposed to hit someone in the face hard, but I mean, still, it's a shallow target zone, and you're not wearing fencing masks, and we're always concerned about that. I mean, my concern as I look at, Dan Gallagher and these other guys like leaping around is not that they're going to take a blade to the face. It's the ground. The ground will hit you every single time, right? Gravity, makes no exceptions. And I think one of the only injuries I saw in that match was actually someone falling and twisting, an ankle, which, that can happen to any of us. But yeah, obviously, the more acrobatic you become, the more likely that is. One of the other things that is interesting, though, you got to, if you get back to rule sets as pedagogical tools, clearly Ludosport is trying to make students who are going to move and act and fight a certain way, and that's very, very important to them. That's why they have style points that are like just as important as their war points, and they have style judges. And the success of their system really depends on it. But looking at the people in that tournament, it's clear that, this is a multi-year process to gain those bodily habits, to be able to do that, to fight like that actually safely. This is not a quick thing, right? The guys in America who have been doing this for a couple years are very good, but they are clearly not like the guys from Italy who have been doing this like a decade. And you realize this is a very long learning curve that this rule set, imposes on you. So there's another thing that we can think about. How fast do you want to bring somebody into the system? How quickly do you want to get them up to speed and have them to be on that same, level? Because, the elegance of Ludosport, I think, also makes it, a complex system with a very long learning curve.
Yes, and I will say this, just for me, it's like fencing. I was not able to discern the rule set by watching the match. The things that are happening, the he's and the hoes and all that kind of stuff, it's all gibberish to me at that point. I will acknowledge here, we have just been joined by Anthony.
Hello. I don't have a camera, so you have to put up with my handsome picture.
All right.
It's a cool icon. Thank you for joining us.
Yes, there we go. So,
hello, Anthony.
Yeah.
Hello.
All right. So I think probably next then we go to probably one of the breakout one recently, which is kind of on the opposite spectrum a little bit. Saber Legion. Now they've taken kind of our philosophy of armoring up and going for real hits and stuff like that,
and being safe.
Right, being the other safeties,
good safety gear,
safety gear, all that.
All the time.
Yep. I will say, I mean, I will say that in some of their rule sets, and we'll talk about that because there are some things which are a little bit weird. But it is more of a kind of martial art-y type intuitive point system, I think. It's first come, first serve. First person to get the hit gets the point. That's probably how everybody started sparring.
Yeah. Right.
Until we, kind of got a little bit more sophisticated and then said, oh, we want to be able to do other things than just kind of tag each other. And then you can start into like designating hits. So I believe all of the hits are 1 point. You can hit the head, you can, all of this. You can hit the back of the hand and the wrist, but you can't hit the fingers or the thumb, which to me is that's dangerous. That's challenging. I would have just done it above the wrist or below the wrist, which is fine.
They run timed bouts, but they also have a maximum score.
Right. Well, I think they have a maximum score. Their bouts are timed, but they also reset between points. So the flow of these matches is very staccato. It's lots of blah, 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 then boom, and then point, reset, process starts over again. Which is a very common, like I said, a very common way of doing things.
A lot of rule systems use a reset after a point.
Yeah, and that's the other thing. We were talking about timed rounds earlier. Resetting between each point is obviously the antithesis of that, where you want to kind of ruminate on each point. They don't thrust. We don't thrust either because these blades don't bend. But they can thrust to the chest. They can thrust. I think they can thrust the mat. Maybe not, but they can thrust to the chest. I was at a meet here in Michigan a couple of times. The thing with the chest is that most chest protectors, you can't thrust to the neck and you can't thrust to the abdomen, to the lower abdomen.
Or the thighs. No thrust to the thighs, I think.
Right. The problem is that I found is that most armor bevels toward the neck and toward the abdomen, right? So even if you get a legal thrust, it's going to slide up or slide down, and that's so that was kind of a problem people were having. But these things get ironed out all the time, so you never know when how they're gonna figure that little piece out.
I don't remember which group it was, but when we were reviewing some rule sets, there was one rule set that started with the updates they'd made from 2017, then there were the updates from 2016, then the rule set. So this is a living process.
Yeah, yes,
people are responding to the feedback.
Yeah, exactly. So the advantages obviously of that is that it's very accessible to people. People can kind of walk in off the street and do that. Who hit first, and that's just like a kind of a judgment thing.
I pulled up the rule section on after blows because that's something that
yes,
it's a common element, and specifically they make a reference to after blows being any hit scored after an initial point is recognized. The after blow is not scored. First contact always wins the point, regardless of a point value of a target. So there are variation on target locations. Then they have double hits or ties where two blows, each person lands a blow simultaneously, and there are no points scored for the first two occurrences of that. Beyond that, the participants begin losing points for double blows. So this is one of those rule concepts that endeavors to encourage good defensive fighting.
Right. At least, yes, that part does. Trying to get away from the double, the bane of all this existence, is definitely one of these things. Discourage that. But the afterblow, I think, is also kind of important. Because if it's easy to ignore a defense because you can get in quicker.
Drop a very short, fast strike that leaves you open.
Right.
He's not doing anything to protect you. And if the other person has an attack that's coming just a moment after, if we're talking about simulating what happens in a fight, most likely that afterblow is something that could be debilitating to fatal.
Yes, exactly.
Especially if we're talking about sabers.
Right, and we're talking, and we're not, yes, it is a conceit and all of that, but from us, from martial arts standpoint, we don't generally, if there's an afterblow, we consider that kind of like a double, as a no-no, and that's where you can get into the rule sets of like priority and stuff like that. Who had this, that, and the other.
It's an opportunity to refine that, developing a good defensive fighting style.
Yes, yeah. So we've got some aspect of defensive in there with the double. It's still, you can still kind of like give up a point. So fireballing is still sort of sort of seems to be you're still able to do that there. But again, like I said, this is an easy system to score. It's an easy system to play with. You know, you don't need any ridiculous experience. It's
it's a good bar for entry. You can draw.
Yeah, exactly. And the number of people who have no experience in martial arts and everything that are involved in it is probably testament to that. You know, so they have a lot of people who probably would never have tried anything like this before. You know, and yeah, you know, so there you go. So that's kind of like the two different ends of the spectrum. You have something that's kind of very stagey. It's not exactly stage, but its emphasis is more on aesthetics and that kind of thing. And then you have something that's going to more onto the performance aspect of it. Or I shouldn't say performance, that's going to confuse things, but the individual skill level and all of that kind of thing. More of a, you know, kind of intuitive martial art approach to it.
Closer to combative, actual combative.
Right. Yes. So those are the kind of two basics. We've got, I mean, there's lots of places out there that haven't, like we said, all this kind of stuff.
I think generally speaking, a number of systems we've seen on some other style scoring system.
Sure, right.
A couple of places use scoring systems that are similar to sport fencing. There's the influence of boxing style time bouts, which we've mentioned already. Right. The kind of first blood styles where it's you're you know the first good blow and ends the match or scores the point, what have you.
Yeah, that's the other thing too. You can play first blood where it's a match where it's just one hit, you know, and you know that's it. Which is fun.
One of the things we could think about is how you score other sorts of things besides hits.
Yeah.
We were going through and we were reviewing all of, you know, the documentation and the scoring systems before this. I noticed that the Lightspeed Lightsaber League changed some of their rules this year so that, you know, rather than, you know, 1 point for a hit, 3 points for a clean hit, you now get more points if your hit comes off of a successfully executed parry, right? Because they want to encourage more defensive behavior in their fighters. So suddenly, rather than just void and hit over and over again, they're trying to create this incentive to actually, you know, engage in an exchange. If you parry and then, you know, riposte, if you parry and then thrust, you're going to get extra points for that. You know, suddenly we can score your parry as well.
Yeah, actually, that's in Blumbing, which is the Chinese fencing. I believe that's one of the rules is that you get 1 point for a clean hit and then 2 points for a parry and hit. So if you come off of a defensive technique, you get an extra incentive for that. And yeah, that's another rule set that's out there. The Lightspeed people there, and that's based on more. It seems like it's based more on a fencing type of thing, and so you get definitely that kind of vibe of really fast back and forth and, you know, that kind of thing. Very much like the Saber, what was it? The Saber Authority in Singapore, over there. They basically started out doing just like our hand hunt, which I think is they just were going for their hands and doing little timed rounds, 1.5 minutes or something like that. And you can see they got tons of videos up there. I think they're from a Kali Eskrima background because a lot of their stuff kind of looks like that.
Yeah, they are.
Yeah. Okay. And yeah, so there was now recently. When we were doing the research for this show, we've noticed that they've really upped their protective gear. They now have fencing helmets and lacrosse gloves, which is definitely a great thing, which they hadn't been using before. I know fencing and lacrosse gear is not popular in Asia because of the heat. And so that's where you get a lot of the foam weapons and all that kind of stuff, because people are just very loath to put that much gear on. But
It's, yeah.
whatever. That's that. It's who's there. So those are two different kinds of things. Those are very fast-paced rule sets. I believe the Saber Authorities is also simple enough that you can have people just kind of walking in off the street and doing it, because they have tons and tons of people doing it on those videos. So definitely looks like it was at least a mildly successful in their area endeavor, and they seem to be going pretty well still to this day.
Congratulations.
Yes, exactly. So yeah, that's another one. Those are they're in their rule set, which is on their website. You can go to their website. We'll put links to all of these in the description. It has their rule set, which is very simple. You can follow it, pretty much. It also, I will say this, their thing seems easy to self-score. That's just me, though. Self-scoring is something that I tend to like, because it's something that people can do together when it's just two people kind of hanging out.
It's one of those things that makes it's easier to get people engaged in.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. Yes. Gentlemen, anything to add?
You guys pretty much cover everything. I'm just enjoying the show. Consider me an audience member today.
Well, I had one other thing that I wanted to bring up. So I in terms of, rule set envy, I ran across something that I thought was, kind of interesting. I had kind of noticed this, but it never really consciously occurred to me what was going on. Because, the way the rhythm of the match evolves, it's very much like, the kind of informal sparring that we do. But, SSL, as I was reading through the Sports Saber League's, rule set, they kind of try to bridge this gap between continuous play and, breaking between points. And that, you have a certain number of hit points. They're one of the hit point based systems where you're counting down, as I think is important to encourage defensive behavior. But if you're scoring minor kind of non-critical hits, hits to limbs and things like that aren't counted as a mortal wound, you continue, on. Points are scored, but you don't stop the match, right? You continue the exchange. But if someone scores what would be a mortal wound in this system, which doesn't necessarily end the match, but, someone gets a solid, hit to the head kind of a thing, at that point, you do stop and, you break the fighters up, right? So it kind of tries to bridge these two different styles of play. And it's interesting because, when you think about what happens in the studio when you're just kind of sparring with your buddies, right? I mean, that's kind of how it happens, right? It's that, hand hits, arm hits happen. You might say something, but you go on, you ring someone's bell and everyone's like, okay, yeah, all right, reset, right? And so that was interesting to me because it kind of intuitively captured the rhythm of a lot of the informal sparring that I'm kind of used to anyway. And so I thought that was an interesting idea.
Yeah, we did that when we were trying to time rounds that mortal hits or whatever, because and that's the thing with weapons, unlike barehanded fighting, right? You have the possibility that, you would not have survived that. That would have been it.
Single debilitating hit is much more likely.
Yeah, exactly. So if I, there, but you talk about it got difficult for us, and then this is all I'm just going to say, because when do you stop it for a hand hit? Luke couldn't continue. I mean, it's like with a lightsaber, all that kind of thing. Do you do that, or do you just come up with a conceit that you would have armored gauntlets on that would be somewhat protective against the lightsaber? I mean, you can come up with all kinds of stuff like that. Like we came up with armor bonuses, so that as a handicap system, that if if you have two fighters who are of vastly different levels, we would give one person an armor bonus, meaning for every one hit this person can get on this person has to get 2 or 3 on the other person to score a point. Just to, make it even, give, let people of different levels play with each other, and yet still allow the more novice person to have fun and the more expert person to be challenged a little bit, right? Or you say it to the more expert person, it is sudden death for you. They touch you with that thing, it's over. So you can't get any hits on you, and then they can just move on. There. So those are like little dynamics that you can set up in those types of things.
So it's one of those engagement tools.
Yeah. So and I think I would probably say Saber Legion, looking at the way they fight, they do kind of a mix between that too. It's just, I think they have so many legal hits that action stops a lot. But you can see, like, if they hit the fingers or whatever, sometimes they just move on. And I'm not really that. I mean, obviously, it's hard to tell when you're watching a match exactly what's going on, and as far as the rules are all going.
Especially if you're watching on video.
Yeah.
Being there, being at a match in person gives you a better view, a better understanding.
Yeah.
Distance and resolution has an impact on what you can actually get out of what you're watching.
Yeah. And the nice thing about it is that there's, Ludosport is pretty unique, I would have to say, as far as the rule set goes. But most of these other ones, like we said, they kind of seem to descend from some other more familiar system.
The basic premise is getting a certain number of touches on another person determines who wins.
Yeah, exactly. Obviously the major points to be thinking about is you want to encourage defensive technique. You don't want people to just fireball and go right for the hit, because then you get what, kind of like whack-a-mole, where it says bonk, 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 bonk. But I think one time I tried not counting doubles and just moving through doubles, and that was ridiculous. They just kept hitting each other over the head at exactly the same time. Nobody even made an attempt to parry anything, which is a big thing.
I would like to add something.
Yes, go ahead.
You were talking about hands. As everybody knows, my favorite target is the lead hand. I mean, that's my bread and butter. Just growing up in FMA, we have the defanging of the snake. The steak. Now I'm hungry. And so, our rules for what we do is a shot to the hand. You're done. Fight's over. I mean, not the match is over, but if that was a real life thing, we're two, Jedi and a Sith, no armor, and I pop the hand or my hand gets hit, my saber's done. I just turned into Luke. So that's a really important thing for us. Now, there's a guy out there. You mentioned that group in Singapore.
Saber Authority.
Yes. The way they did it, I actually had very good conversations with those guys. And it was all about the hand, and moving around a lot. They kept it very theatrical. But they really weren't, in my opinion, staying true to what FMA is. However, there is a guy named Ferd Tirado, and he runs a group called, it used to be called the Saber Tribe, and they just rebranded. Now they're called Saber Tactics, the Way of LED Saber Combat. If you get a chance, check him out. He's out in California. He's an FMA guy like me. But what he tries to do is make it very entertaining with a lot of dynamics with single saber, double saber, saber staff, really entertaining with protection, proper mask, gloves. But he tries very, very hard to maintain the integrity of the art, so it's not just whack-a-mole and it's not just hand hunt. It's full package. So that's pretty much the only thing I had to say on that. The hand strikes for us are important, but we also go for everything else. And if I hit a hand and my hand gets hit at the same time, technically I hit first or they hit first, but nobody gets the point. However, if I hit the hand and I'm able to, escape, clearly I get the point. If I hit the hand and in the process of escaping, there's a good lag time and I get bonked on the head by the hand I just hit, I still get the point, that kind of thing. So I don't know if that's of any value to the conversation.
Yeah, that's usually what the kind of tagging type of systems will go to, the trading of the hits, and then there's there's a certain amount of time between this that is an afterblow and all of that kind of thing. A lot of people say, well, there'll be a beat, Now there are rule sets that will, and like the headhunt, hands don't count. The purpose of that is to get people to go deeper, right, and to learn how to go for the body, go for the head, right, get past the weapon and into there. And one thing we didn't get to mention in here is, and this is one thing that we did not see, we didn't see any rule set that included grappling.
There was one that allowed for not grappling, ground fighting, but you could grab an opponent's arm or shoulder or do a push or a shove to redirect or reposition.
Right.
Most often, the rule sets specifically disallow any kind of unarmed technique.
Yep, exactly. And so that was, as far as the things that we want to do, is the only thing that we probably can offer that we don't see as being, well, we're not offering it necessarily, we don't sell nothing, but that we don't see out there is anything that incorporates grappling, because that's a big, from our traditions, from where we're coming from, that's a huge part. Now, in our rule sets that we use here, in all of them, grappling is totally allowed. You can come in there, you can move the arm, move all that kind of stuff. With the lightsaber, you cannot grab the blade, of course. If you're using a regular sword, of course, you can half sword and do all that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. You can't score with grappling, nor can you score with a barehanded technique. So if I hit you in the face, great, but you didn't score. You have to. That barehanded technique has to open them up for some sort of weapon technique. So if I throw you on the ground, fantastic. Don't get the point until I actually get a strike on you. We have had encounters where somebody has thrown the other swordsman and the other person has successfully defended and won the point from the ground. So it's not, putting that stuff in there sometimes is there. Now I know a lot of people, if you allow that kind of stuff, now you're dealing with, you have to have people who are a little bit higher level fighting. You can't have the novices, because you're dealing with things which are, can be fairly dangerous. Yeah. And if somebody doesn't do it right. There was that video that was going around where some dude suplexed somebody in a longsword tournament. Yeah.
So I got a lot of comments on both sides of the discussion.
Yeah. I saw it. I'm not sure why he chose that technique. There seemed to be many other throws available to him from that spot, but hey, I don't know. We don't have the technique for you. But anyway, that's one thing that we didn't see a whole lot. I think a lot of that comes from the fact that these are lightsabers. People are really, oh no, we don't want to get in there and all that kind of stuff. But
emphasis is there on the tool.
Yeah. But hey, we do it all the time, so it is totally possible. all of that kind of thing. So yeah, the grappling thing is a difficult, is a kind of difficult thing to kind of integrate. We would like people to integrate it because it's, at least, as we said, manipulating the weapon hand or everything like that. I think it's perfectly permissible to use the empty hand.
But keeping in mind our constant message of safety.
Exactly.
You need to be safe doing it.
Yeah, absolutely. You don't go starting to try to throw people around if you've never taken a class or you've never done anything like that before, right? Don't try to manipulate people's joints. Don't try to trip people. Don't try to, do anything like that. All of that stuff, if you're going to do it without hurting the other person, takes a fair amount of skill. You need, especially in a free play kind of scenario, because there's a lot of struggle, and even high level people get injured all the time.
What was that? Gravity always wins?
Or the gravity always wins, or the ground never misses.
Yeah, the ground never misses. That's it.
Okay.
Exactly. So I mean, that's the thing. You're going with a sharp weapon. You're going all like that. And we said this last time with General Sun. I like to get in there. And use that stuff. So any rule set that kind of can incorporate that aspect into it is something I really, really, really like. I feel a little bit cut off from some of the game if I can't do that, So, but I understand why people don't do it. Totally. Absolutely.
Yeah. But it's when you're halitosis distance, it doesn't seem normal to not be able to do something with the person.
Right. Yeah. To at least go up and grab their weapon and try to move it away from you. Anyway, all right. Well, we are a little bit over. So, anyway, do we have any final comments before we end for the evening?
No, it was very interesting. Thank you for all these comments. It was very cool.
No, great. I'm glad. Yeah, we're not making any judgments on any of this stuff, right? We're just trying to give you kind of like an overview of what we saw out there. It's just the flavors, right? There's a lot of flavors out there that people can do. If you want something that's going to be more martial art, going to be a little bit easier to kind of get into at an entry level, Saber Legion's your game. Want something a little bit more theatrical and fancy or whatever? Maybe Ludo Sport, maybe something like that. I don't know. Or Academy Saber Laser.
And
if you're in France,
we do have news about things that are the types of skills we like to see people develop.
Yes.
So that may shine through here, but I think this isn't a judgment or a criticism.
No.
Of any particular system.
No. And what we would just like to encourage everybody out there doing this is, again, defend yourself. When the traditional way of starting a sword fight is say on guard, right?
Agreed. Definitely.
So, yes, defend yourself. Don't just because the hits. And I say this. I'm going to say this with a little bit of a caveat here, because we're not actually receiving the injuries, right? We don't necessarily finish them. I am not saying at all, don't use gear and that will be better. No. What I'm saying is use a rule set so you don't injure yourself and you can tell, did I injure myself? Like I said, get a rule set that you can trust to tell you when you did something right, essentially.
Yeah, I think you have to strike that balance. You don't want to go in and caveman bonk each other on the head, and you don't want to tiptoe around, like a ballet dancer. And again, it's not an insult. I'm not trying to be insulting. We're trying to find that balance where what you're doing resembles real life. What if this thing was real? What if this saber was real? I've often demonstrated the effectiveness of a light strike with a dagger to a phone book. And my students are always amazed how a flick of the wrist can put an inch-deep gash into a phone book. And I want them to understand there's a balance there. We are training this lightsaber thing, but we're treating it as if it's real. I guess that's so there has to be balance. Not too hard, not too soft. The rules have to kind of push you towards as real as it gets, not to coin a famous frame.
Yeah, and that's definitely one goal of a rule set, right? We've talked about that at the beginning. So you have the trying to attain some modicum of realism, which again we know is impossible, right? And in fact, not wanted. We don't want real in our training. Training is training. We want to survive training. We want to live through training. We want to go on and do stuff. So yeah, there's nothing that. We've got the stuff like Cedric's system, which is there to create a more dynamic play and something that's more interesting to watch. We've got the games that are supposed to single out specific skills, right? You know, getting in deep, trying this. We played one game where we basically, it was basically a hand and head targets, right? But we started from the bind.
Yeah.
So you start halitosis range, as Vornox called it, right there. Instead of starting at either end of the arena, you start in the bind. And so now your first thought is not how do I get to the person and hit them, but it's how do I do anything without allowing them to hit me? Because if you're in a bind, you're kind of safe, right? Doing this, and they can't take their blade away because you can hit them, and you can't take your blade away because they can hit you.
Yeah.
And then it turns into a whole different game. So you can do all kinds of stuff with that.
If you limit mobility, now you have to put even more focus on your stationary body positioning,
Right,
and control of the weapons.
Yep, absolutely. You know,
there's an almost endless variety of things that you can try.
absolutely, and they can all be good. The one thing that we want to say, you know, with all of this stuff is that it's all uncooperative, right? You have two people trying to attain the same goal, and only one person can, and that's kind of the important. We'll get into stuff where we're trying to get into multiple people later. This is just single combat. We'll just deal with that. Most people aren't going to be messing with multiple people.
A melee is a very different animal.
Oh, very, very, very different. But that's a discussion for another time.
Yeah.
But anyway, the bottom line here is we now have a wealth. Like I said, we started back in 2012. Nothing. Right now we've got. How many we've talked about? 5 tonight. There's umpteen more that we didn't mention.
How many hundreds of clubs, groups, leagues, organizations have some variation on some rule set to experiment with?
And I'm sure every martial arts school that has a lightsaber class out there has their own rule set and all of that. So just go out there and experiment. Find the one that's right for you. You know, kind of stick with it. Hopefully we will see all of this continue to blossom, and we'll see more and more of these things kind of come to the forefront. We'll see different sets, different technologies that allow us to do all kinds of different stuff. All right, well, we will leave it there then tonight, since we went over about 20 minutes here, but it's one of these topics that's kind of a thing for us.
Enthusiastic about it.
Yes. Exactly. So I will thank Anthony, Ben, and Cedric for joining us tonight.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you for all.
Thank you for having us.
Yes.
Roger.
And
Roger.
absolutely. And thank you to everybody out there for tuning in. We will see you around. Hopefully you'll go find a group. You'll start doing some training and getting there. And hopefully you won't just fight. Hopefully you get in there and you'll try to learn something too. You know, go do some martial arts. You know, we've got the videos you're free to use anytime. And but you know, bring something to it. You know, there's a reason why we study this stuff, because it works. It does.
Yeah.
Trust us. Anyway. All right.
Okay. Happy sabering.
Yes. We will see you next time. Happy sabering.
Bye.